Hello everyone, my name is Zach Burley and welcome to my winter 1915 turn of the Paths of Glory playthrough, just to kind of bring you back up to speed, because it's been a while since I've done one of these. The Western Front is somewhat stabilizing. The Central Powers right now are 18 victory points, and I did make a mistake on both fronts, one for either side, so I'm going to let them stand. Actually, very similar mistake. So when I played a reinforcement card on the Western Front, the corps that are involved are supposed to go to the reserve box, not directly onto the map. So I brought on the Second Army and these two corps, and these corps would have not been allowed on the map. So they would have not been able to close up this gap on this left side. So that's a mistake. But on the Eastern Front, I did the same thing. The Germans brought on maybe the 10th Army, as well as these two corps, which would not have been allowed to happen. So I'm going to let both of them stand because they are basically the same thing, and they both gave victory points. These two would have not fallen had these corps not been here. And, these three would not have fallen had those corps not been there. So I'm going to let it stand. But for future reference, I do know that corps go to the reserve box. Thank you to the person who corrected me on that. So let's go ahead and take a look at the starting hands for both sides. And both of them are in limited war, by the way. Combined war status is at 9. So I don't think either side will be able to get total war this turn, but take a look at the hand. So we have Maud, which is a combat card, British reinforcements, and these are the Australian corps. So this is for the Near East, so we'll get to that in just a second. British reinforcements for the main front on the Western Front, Alpine troops, another combat card, French reinforcements, Pleve, I guess there's more of one of these. Here's the interesting one, though. Italy coming into the war, and this is pretty well timed for the Allies, because obviously the Austrians have not finished off the Serbs, and they're static on the Galatian front, so they've not diverted any forces back to the Italian front, so they can probably spring this on them and bring the Italians in. Maybe they can get a few victory points, and maybe even break through on that front and really cause the Austrians some difficulties. Now on for the Central Powers hand. We have Czar takes command. We held this one from last turn. Stavka Timidity, which we can't play until this comes into play, if it does. Bulgaria, the Allies have their own entry card, and to bring the Bulgarians in. So maybe this is obviously the Central Powers don't know this, but when they do find out, it may be a good balance to bring in the Bulgarians to handle the Serbs, while the Austrians in Serbia go and reinforce the Italian front. Another reinforcements card. Another reinforcements card. The war in Africa, which is nice, because they could force a British corps out from the Western Front. This could be a good opener. Place of execution. I don't think we've actually had Hindenburg and Ludendorff take command yet, so this one has to wait. But the biggest thing, of course, we'll be getting the Czar takes command. They're working on that on the Eastern Front, but they haven't, quite reached that just yet. So I'm going to take a look at these hands, and I'll bring to you the turns that make sense. Okay, so the Germans opened up by attempting to entrench on the Western Front. They got Cambrai successfully entrenched. The other part's going to be what I'm going to show you here, which is an attack No. The purpose for this obviously is to get this Zartek's command card eligible, because they need 3 Russian victory point spaces, and they already have 2. Kovno, if they can at least knock the first army out, then they can keep moving on and probably get Vilna. Plus they have these other corps further down which can take out a few. So it'll be 7 against 3. No flanking attacks, it's just straight up. Well, actually 7 against 4 because of the fort. Pretty high numbers. It'll be on the army table, everything here. Army fire 4, 6, 4 loss factors, and on the 7 it'll be 5. So the Germans will win this. It'll be 2, 4, and then 5. And then the Germans will lose 4 themselves. So they'll flip the 10th Army in this corps to make 4. And then I believe fort spaces might allow you to not retreat. But even if they do, the Russian corps would be eliminated, so what's the point? Only full strength units can move in, and none of them are full strength, so I don't believe they can. I'll double check that off camera. But it'll go over to the Allies now. Either way, the Russian army is falling back, and I don't know whether or not the Allies even have a Russian reinforcements card, because if they do, it'll be desperately needed. They do not. So this could be a quick bang bang on the Eastern Front. Alright, so after the collapse in the north, the Austrians are going to press the issue now. The Russians SR'd the 8th Army from here north into Kovno to seal things up there. Of course, they left themselves exposed in the south. They knew that was going to happen, and the Central Powers wanted to press their advantage while they had the chance. They're going to do a 3-point card, War in Africa. They don't want to play this one just yet because it'll likely give a point to the Allies, so they can hold on to this when they're going to try and do that and play it at a later date. Because if they can win this turn, then obviously that's not a card you want to get out. So it's going to take place in 2 phases. It's going to be the 4th Army and this corps attacking Limburg, trying to get that victory point back. There will be a flanking attack. And it's going to be the 2nd and 3rd Armies attacking Dubno, which is a fort. So we'll do this attack here. It's going to be 6 against 4, because the fort provides 1. 6 against 4. No flanking attacks, of course. And let me just do a quick check to make sure that the Allies don't have a combat card. They do. And it's tempting because it's they get a +1 in attack or defense. And it's tempting to use it here because, I mean, obviously this is, they don't want to collapse on this front, but also using it in the north. I think they will use it here. And try and hold off the Austrians, because I'll double check on this, but I think it's for each attack individually. Like, they can't use it on this whole offensive. They use it on attack, and if they win this attack, then they can use it here. But it might be the whole offensive. I'll check that in just a second. But they'll get a +1 modifier. Pretty high roll. So it'll be a 6 and a 5 for the respective sides. the Army fire table under 6, a 6 is 5. And for the Russians, it'll be a 6 as well, but that's under 3. It will be a 4. So we'll go ahead and dish those out now. 5 will be 2, 4, and then 5. The Austrians have to take 4. So the hard part here is obviously if you want to advance into the space, you have to go in with a full strength unit. So you don't really want to lose an army, but you also want to advance in. So they're going to reduce this down. That's 2, 4. Do they even have? Yep. And that'll replace it with a full strength core. That'll go in the reserve box, or rather the eliminated replaceable box. So they'll have to retreat out, and they're going to go to the east. The Austrians will advance in, but they won't take the space. Because they still have to besiege it. Now for the second attack, 4th Army in the core. This will be a flanking attack, so they're going to roll. Try and go for it first. And it will be successful. So they can roll their dice before the Russians can roll theirs. And they get just a 2, which is not great. But it'll be a 2 plus 1 for the flank attack, I believe. Which will put them up to a 3 on the Army fire table. 3 for 4 would be 3. So it's not that important that they get a really high roll. And that'll be enough to completely destroy this Russian core unit, which means that they can advance in with no contest, and they're just going to send in this core. That'll move the victory point track up to 19 now, just 1 away. And that will remove this card for sure for the Russians. So on this side, it's not looking great. They just need 1 victory point now. They'll probably actually need a few more, just because blockade takes place at the end of the turn, and I'm not sure if... I think that the automatic victory might happen before the blockade, so either way, I think that Allies might pick up a point or two, because they still have Italy to come into the war, and the Austrians don't know that. So as it stands, things not looking too good for the Central Powers. The one thing I wanted to say, though, is that I love about this game is just how accurate this playthrough has been in just the ideas that it's given me. Just kind of putting me in the shoes of defenders, you know, as the Germans in the Western Front, it was like, okay, well, this is pretty easy. We're going to wipe through these guys and be done by, you know, the fall. We're going to be home before Christmas. And then we hit a roadblock right outside of Paris, which is exactly where the Schlieffen plan kind of came to a halt. And then it kind of came, we have to fall back. We've overextended ourselves. I don't think that we're going to be able to do this now. And then the Eastern Front opens up, and you say, okay, well, look, we can win this thing on the Eastern Front. And that's pretty much what it's been. You know, we'll have to see if they really can't end it here. But I just love how accurate this playthrough has been. And I'm sure it's not always this way, but it just has put me a lot into the shoes of the leaders and the military advisors, who I'm sure were saying a lot of the same things, but you know, they were putting actual lives at risk. So we're going to go over to the Allies now and see what their response is. Okay, so there's been a lot of jockeying since the last card, some shifting around of forces, and the Allied player played for some replacement points. Then the Germans moved around some forces to try and add up their numbers to attack Kovno, and then the Allies attempted to entrench there and failed, figuring that this was kind of one of their last stands. The one thing I didn't think about is as the Central Powers, they can offer peace terms and possibly get a victory point, because if they get this space here, they'll be at 20. I still haven't checked to see if you check for automatic victory before blockade. If you don't, then they'll be at 19, in which case that extra bump, the extra 21, would put them into a victory. So both sides have kind of foregone replacements, have foregone reinforcement cards, are really just pushing in what seems to be kind of like a final offensive here to try and get across the line and win the game. So we're going to go with a two-sided attack, and we're not going to flank because we want as best of possible odds here. We don't really want to mess with things. So it's going to be 4 against 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 3 against 7. 4 against 7. In Kovno. And this would give the Germans the Allies, the Central Powers, excuse me, the victory points they need to win. So it'll be a 6-4. On the Army Fire table, under 7, which is what the Central Powers have, a 6 is 5, and a 4 under 4 is a 3. So 3 losses have to be taken. Only full strength units can enter. So that'll be 1, 2. And they have to take 3 if they can. So just because they really want to get in here, they're going to reduce the 10th Army. For 3. I believe it was 3. Yep. So now either of them can move in. It'll be the remnants of the 10th Army. They're going to take 5 losses, which will be 2, 4, and then 5. And they'll retreat to Vilna. Now, the thing is, they haven't captured this space yet, so that could be the saving grace. They'll move in. And besiege. This space also down here is under siege. So they haven't gotten to 20 yet. They would extend their supply lines, but they might be able to attack here before the end of the turn. I don't think it's possible. The Allies still have to do a mandated offensive with the French on the Western Front, otherwise they're going to lose the game off of missed mandatory offensive. So there's a possibility there's a breakthrough over there. They can get a point just to keep them alive, but the Germans are seriously considering offering peace terms, which could get them across. Okay, the Allies are responding with a offensive on the Western Front. This is going to meet their Allied mandated offensive requirement, and it's going to be a 2-pronged attack coming out of Verdun and Chateau Thierry against Sedan. The thing is, the Germans were able to entrench in Cambrai, and the support for an attack there was not as great. The thing about Sedan is, of course, it is a forest space, so if the Germans do take losses here, they can reinforce. They can, take a step loss to stay in the space, but the Allies have one more card that they might be able to throw into the mix if they do make gains here. Either way, they're foregoing a victory point loss with a advance here, and worst case scenario they don't lose a victory point, best case scenario they gain one. So this was a risk worth taking. So it's going to be two-pronged, no pinning attack or flanking maneuver. They want to just get as many hits as they can. So the two-sided, it's going to be 9 against 6. Go ahead and roll these up now. Ooh. So we got Snake Eyes, 1 and 1. A 9 on the loss table is still a 3. And a 1 on the 6 table is a 3 as well. So we're going to cancel each other out and there will be no advance. So the 3 will come from the 10th Army. And the 3 here will come from the 2nd Army. 4 German armies now in the Central Powers eliminated replaceable box. And they'll replace that with a full strength corps. So that makes the Allied mandated offensive go away. They've done that. It'll go over to the Central Powers now. One quick reminder, just because I forgot, was that Italy has now entered the war. And the important thing about this is that the Germans are kind of screwed because they have in their hand all of the Tsar takes command and Bulgaria. They obviously can't play Bulgaria, and that's something I didn't know actually until I went down here and looked on this little chart that tells you some of the basic rules about action rounds and stuff. I did not know you couldn't play 2 neutral entries on the same turn, so of course the Central Powers would have never known that the Allied player had the Italy card, but they would have loved to have gotten this out before. Italy came out because they were hoping to respond by playing Bulgaria, which would free up Austrian forces, which means they could reinforce the Italian front. It didn't happen because they couldn't play it. But the thing now is they can't play Tsar takes command because they haven't taken 3 victory point spaces technically. They're besieging one, but they haven't taken it, which means they have to play one of these 2 cards. Now, I'm not sure if they can take a 1-ops. I know a 1-ops is available if you're out of cards, but if you still have eligible cards, I don't know if you can still play a 1-ops card as a otherwise, because if they don't, they're going to have to trash one of these cards and put it in the discard pile for come back who knows when. And they obviously don't want it to be Tsar takes command because they're so close to achieving that, and they don't really want it to be Bulgaria because they want to reinforce. But I think Bulgaria out of these 2 is the more trashable card. So it'll go over to the Central Powers now, and this will probably be this next coming up, and will probably be the last clip that we do for this turn as we wrap things up here and see if the Central Powers can get across the line. Okay, so I've figured out what the actions are going to be for the Central Powers. So I was stuck with, do I play one of these 2 cards? Do I go with the 1-ops? Which I did figure out. I'm pretty certain you can do that. I think it says you can forego playing a strategy card and play a 1-ops operation point instead. So they could do that. But I decided the better idea is to offer peace terms because that does not require a play of a card. I thought you had to play a card with a certain ops value to do that. You do not. You can just straight up offer peace terms. And the reason I'm going to do that is because, first of all, it saves a card in case this all goes wrong. But if they get a victory point, that'll put them to 20. I figured out the blockade does take effect first, which will put them back down to 19. Then the siege phase will come. If they win the siege here, they'll be back up to 20, and they'll get automatic victory. But in the end, it'll all come down to whether or not the siege wins there, if this victory point goes. Now, if it doesn't matter. They'll end the turn on 19. But this roll here is 2 big rolls in this game. It's going to be this one, and it's going to be in the siege phase. They have to have both of them go their way if they want to win now. Now, of course, playing an opposed game, your opponent can just accept the peace terms, and it ends in a draw. So if I was the Allied player, do I think about this and say, well, I think I could take a draw here, and that's better than losing? That's the one thing about offering peace terms is technically it is a draw, not a win. So if you're going to offer it, you always have the worry of your opponent drawing the game rather than losing the game. So as an Allied player, I might take that. But of course, that's no fun when you're playing solo. So we're going to go ahead and roll now for these peace terms. The table is on the back of this player aid sheet. Oh, no, it's on the front. So to give you an idea, here it is. So we're going to be rolling on the Central Powers. We're still at the 0 to 19 combined war status. So a 1 through 3 gets it. 6 actually loses a victory point. 4 and a 5 does nothing. So the odds are in our favor, but there is a chance that we end up losing a victory point, which would be a disaster. So here it goes. There's no modifiers. Of course, look at that. It's a 6. What are the odds? It's 1 in 6, of course, but it just had to be, didn't it? Just had to be. As soon as I said the odds are in our favor. So this is going to go down to 18. Central Powers offer peace terms to the Allies. It's viewed as a point of weakness. It's rejected categorically, and it's viewed as the Central Powers trying to find a way out early, and they end up losing a victory point from the war. So they could end up at 17 points at the end of this. They could end up at 19. Rather, they could end up at 18. So, man, that really could have been it. But for the sake of this playthrough, I'm glad it wasn't, because we get to go on. If it had ended here, it would have been a very short playthrough. But just remember this moment, if it does go the other way at the end of the game, that this was the moment that the game could have very easily been won by the Central Powers. And to be fair, they really should have. We could have gone on and played for maybe a few more victory points with a card play or two, but they decided to go straight up and go for a peace victory. So it didn't work out. The Allies will have one more card play. They have this replacements card for the British, and they're going to play it right now to get the Third Army into play alongside 2 corps. They have no corps in the replacement box. They're going to need some to do replacements with. So they'll bring the Third Army straight into London. These 2 corps will go in the Allied reserve box. And that will bring this turn to an end. We're going to have to go into the war status phase, and this is going to go down by 1 because of the blockade. Let me make sure that's been played, because I'm pretty sure it has. But just to be sure, yes, it has. So it is the winter turn. Yep. So they got lucky that came around on this turn. So they're going to lose 1 for that. And then it will go to the automatic victory. Has not happened. Armistice will not happen. War commitment level isn't quite there. The Allies are at 7. Central Powers are still at 4. And the combined war status is at 11. We'll go on to the replacement phase. Oh, sorry, we were supposed to do the attrition and the siege phase before we did all of that. My bad. So the attrition, everybody's fine on attrition. The siege phase, we're going to roll for Dubno, Brest-Litovsk, and Kovno, I believe, are the only 3 places that are besieged. So let's get a roll on that. So they'll go from bottom to top. Just have to roll greater than a 1 in Dubno. They do not. The Germans have a cursed die. Now it'll be Brest-Litovsk. A 2 this time. So Brest-Litovsk will fall. The fort is destroyed. Sorry, actually I have Grondo as well. Or Grodno. It's a 4. And now Kovno, which would put him back up to 18. It's a 3. So the victory point marker will go up to 18. I believe the Central Power started off on 18 points at the beginning of the turn. I don't remember exactly, but all that leaves is a replacement phase and strategy cards for next turn. So I'll do that off camera, get some replacements in for the Allies. The Central Powers never got any because they were really pressing for a victory. This one thing is the Russian capitulation track will move down to Tsar takes command allowed, because there are 3 captured Russian victory points, so that'll probably be the opening card for the Central Powers at the beginning of next turn, which will move them one step closer to knocking the Russians out. So I look on this turn, it's a victory for the Central Powers, there's no doubt about that. They didn't make huge gains, but they broke the Russians. You have to remember how fragile their position is. We talk about, could have been the victory that they wanted on this turn, but as it stands, there's nothing really to stop the Allies from, the Central Powers from just waxing the Russians. It's a matter of getting those cards that allow for the capitulation track to continue, but as it stands, there's nothing really that's going to keep them. They'll have 2 replacement points, the Russians, so maybe they can get a force back up to stop this advance. They're probably going to have to abandon these 2 spaces, just because why are we holding them? They get attacked from both sides by, the Austrians and the Germans. I think it's probably better to hold a line here. Then they're going to have to defend in the south as well. So it's just not great on this front, and that's not really a concern, only for the fact that there are still victory points up for grabs, enough victory points to turn the tide in this game and end it. So, of course, I think the focus is going to shift down for the Allies into the Mediterranean, into the Near East front, and maybe pick up some points there because they really desperately need them. And maybe there's some breakthrough in Italy, but they're going to have to find points somewhere. Otherwise, this isn't going to end well for them because they're still teetering. They're better off than they were, but they're still not in a great position. So that's going to end it for the winter 1915 turn. I'll be back with spring 1915 as soon as possible. Thanks for watching.